Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and today's divination snapshot is brought to you by the letters G, E, O, M, A, N, C, and Y. But today, the snapshot we are talking about, one of my favorites, one of my soul ways of divination, which is the practice of geomancy. Now again, as I'm saying in all of these, because I just don't want somebody to think, oh goodness, I'm supposed to learn all of this in the space of these trying to stay small videos. I have a section in my playlist. I try to keep my videos playlisted, so I do have a playlist on geomancy, and so you can take a look at those. I also do have in the handouts, if you go in the description box below, there's always a link to where any printables or handouts that I have, and I do have a handout on the geomancy figures and what they mean. So if I'm talking fast, don't stress, you can get those handouts. And again, I do have some videos talking about geomancy as well. This is my personal geomancy sort of little white book that I have, that I absolutely love. Of course, we have a section on the history of geomancy. I have taught a geomancy class, and I'm actually working on one, trying to get the videos done ahead of time so that they're kind of set to go. But this is a system that is we first see documentation of in the 9th century, which would be in the 800s, right? So we talked about Lenormand, which is in the early 1800s, and we talked about tarot, which is in the 1400s. Now again, just because we have a tarot deck, the Sforza, in the 1400s, right? That does not mean that that was the first tarot deck. So most likely there had been tarot well before that as well that just didn't survive. I highly doubt that that was the first ever deck that was conceived, right? The same thing with anything that comes to being. It doesn't just spring whole out of the air in that one exact moment. It's generally, there is a history there that's going on, and which we don't see, and especially when you go back into the 9th century, right? So yes, you might first start to see some written indication of a system of using something, but that's probably actually in theory much older than that before it was ever written down, if that makes sense. So geomancy is a very old sense of form of divination that in some ways has a strong feeling, connective feeling to I Ching, which I'll do a different I keep saying snapshot or Snapchat, but snapshot of, I'll do a different snapshot, but it has that same binary sense. So it is a series of 4 lines, which, and instead of 6 like there are in I Ching, it is a series of 4 lines that are cast through random castings. With I Ching, you're using coins, you're using rice, you're using yarrow sticks in order to randomly cast to get either a yin line or a yang line. In geomancy, you are casting even and odd numbers in order to get an active line, which is indicated by a single dot, or a passive line, which is indicated by a double dot. And when those 4 lines come together, once you cast them, which I'll show you in a moment, but I'm just doing my nutshell here. When those 4 lines come together, they create a sigil, they create a character, and in this, a figure would be the most appropriate word. And so for this instance, this is a figure called Karcer. And so that is how we cast. Now, each of these lines are not just separate entities of themselves that make a whole, which they do make the whole, but they also indicate the 4 elements, right? And so the top line represents fire, the second line represents air, the third line here represents water, and the fourth line represents earth. at the feet. It also is that idea of the body where you have the head here, right? You have whoops. I was going to say chest, but it's the throat. Here you have the torso here, and the stomach and the heart and all of this here in water. And then you have the feet here in earth. And so those are even by figures of the line, and what parts are active and which parts are dormant in a figure can tell us something about that particular figure. But the figure itself is used. There are the castings can create 16 different figures. And one of the interesting things about geomancy is that, similar to I Ching, is the understanding. So the hexagrams are considered to not just be representations, but they are part of everything that is made. And the same thing with geomancy. The 16 geomancy figures are part and parcel. They are the building blocks of everything. They're building blocks of energy and how energy functions and moves and works within life, and certainly within our life. And so we had this starting in Africa and going into the Middle East. It was called geomancy because it was literally done in the sand. It was something that you wouldn't need a piece of, or wax, pieces of wax. You wouldn't need to have, unlike its sister, which would be astrology, which was later tied heavily to geomancy, especially when it came into the West. It took paper, a lot of paper, to do astrology, and paper was a commodity that was in the 9th century, not something that was easily got hold of. So if you could do this in the sand, or if you could do this on a wax seal that could be wiped and done again, then that made it much easier to do. We first see it mentioned in European print in the 1300s by Chaucer. He mentions it in the Canterbury Tales, which I studied in college, which is hilarious later on when I found out that that's where it was first mentioned in Europe. Again, just because it comes into writing in a certain time, it probably, if Chaucer is writing it in a poem about the Canterbury Tales and the story here, that means it's something that was in use well before that, if that makes sense. And it was widely practiced in all walks of life in Europe until about the 17th century. And then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the Golden Dawn tries to bring it back into being, but in doing so, they actually caused quite a disservice to geomancy, because it takes, like, they had gathered texts from Middle Eastern languages, different languages from different sources, and pulled about 800 from at least what the history, or what you can look up on it. There's about 800 pages of text that were condensed down into 24 pages that really just about sort of killed any magic that was there, so to speak. So it has been, tried to more recently been revived. There are a few books that you can find on them. I have read most of them. Most of them that I could get a hold of. I'm trying to grab my book pile down here. You can read Cornelius Agrippa, who did a lot of divination and esoteric writings. He has a treatise on geomancy. This is one by Franz Hartmann, which is okay. I don't reference this a whole lot. This is fantastic for astrological geomancy. This is if you're doing what would be considered horary astrology, where you are kind of combining what's going on in astrology at the moment of casting, along with casting of the shield. This is a really fantastic book for that type of geomancy. But if geomancy ends up interesting you in any way, shape, or form, the single book that I think will cover your needs is The Art and Practice of Geomancy, Divination, Magic, and Earth Wisdom of the Renaissance. again, it wasn't, and he does talk about the history of geomancy, but it didn't start in the Renaissance. It was researched or brought to the West, right, and kind of gotten its own astrological overlay. But anyways, this is a fantastic book, really fantastic book. And so if you can certainly take zero knowledge of geomancy combined with this book, and this will definitely get you on the road to. So this is the one that I highly recommend. This would be a little bit more advanced, just in the sense that you probably aren't going to jump right into hoary geomancy, although it is wonderful layer to place onto it. And then there are other books that I have in ebook form, but this is by far the one that I recommend. So that takes us, so that's a modern book. I mean, this was written in, let's see, first published in 2009. And so there is, trying to sort of pull it back, because it is a wonderful, wonderful form of divination. And the first time that I stumbled on divination, it was in an actual card deck. It was an oracle deck, and it was somewhat, it showed a little bit of a connection between playing card readings and reading it in this sort of geomancy format. And so it had a chapter on it, and I was like, geomancy, I mean, surely this is just made up. I've never heard of this before. Went to look it up, and as soon as I read, just what was geomancy and kind of started to figure it out and work with it, I was literally had that feeling of, I was a geomancer in a past life. I've never had that experience. I do believe in past lives. I do past life readings, but I've never had that such a strong visceral connection to something as I have with geomancy. So, of course, had to do a spotlight divination on it. So what is interesting is that it is still primarily read the way, and the figures still primarily are there and mean the same exact thing as they meant all those years ago. And across different cultures, you can look at some of the more Middle Eastern forms of geomancy that have stayed and are still being practiced today, and you can see the same. You can see and understand what it is that they're casting and what it is they're doing. So it really has had a staying power in its original form in a beautiful way, other than perhaps that, I don't know historically that the astrological aspects were there at the beginning. My guesstimate is that something that was layered on at a later date. But I'm not a historian. But we can see in a shield chart. So this is the chart and how you read geomancy. Now, there are a couple different things. There are two, actually. There is a shield chart, which is shaped like a shield when you do it. And we're going to do one so you can get a feel for what is geomancy. And then there is a house chart, which uses the astrological houses. You don't cast to this. You're casting always to the shield. This is it, right? This is the main component of geomancy, but you can transfer them into houses to do some other things to go on, but we're not going to go into that today. We're just going to get into the basics, a quick overview of the basics of geomancy. And then, of course, as the point of this particular series is, why would I use this over something else, right? So what is its strong suit? There are several ways to cast geomancy. And what the point of casting is we're trying to get a figure. So we're trying to figure out what order these go in so that we can see, okay, here we have a figure, or, all right, okay, here we have a figure. We're trying to cast those figures. Now, only the first 4 figures, which are the mothers here, and again, bear with me, this is not a, you're not going to learn everything you need to know about geomancy. I'm just going to give you that nutshell. If it interests you further, the book I recommended, as well as looking for my geomancy playlist, will go a lot faster. Will go a lot slower, and will kind of work you into what geomancy is. This is just to pique your interest and to expose people to various different forms of divination. So, our point is to try to get a figure. There are multiple ways in which you can gain a figure. There are these sticks that you can get. These I had made from Alaska Laser Made on Etsy. Has this wonderful set of, they call Druid sticks, which is kind of misleading because I'm pretty sure, again, geomancy didn't start with the Druids, but maybe using of the sticks did. I'm not sure about that, but if you look up geomancy sticks, sometimes you won't find it, and you have to look up Druid sticks on Geomancy or on Etsy. But these you can kind of roll about, thinking about your question, and sliding them out, right? And there we have where. So we have the figure for boy. And so then we would place that down on our chart. So that's one way that you can cast it. She also, I had her to see if she could do a smaller set that has 3, which you'll see when we talk about the first, second witness and the judge, so that I could use those in readings that I do to show those important figures. So same sort of thing. You can do it a little bit easier to roll, right? And then spread out. And then here we have our figure all set for us in Fortuna Major here. So those are ways that you can do it. But you don't need to have special sticks. You don't need to have little special sticks. Dice are amazing to use for that. There are two ways you can use dice, because you have to know which. You can either take a single dice, as if you just have a white dice, and you can cast for the first one, right? And so if it is an even number, it is passive. If it is an odd number, it is active. And so you can say, okay, well, that's an even number of 2. Cast it again. Okay, that's an odd number, so that's a single dot. Okay, cast it again. That's an even number of 2. Okay, cast it again. That's an odd number. And so here we have the figure for gain, which is called acquisitio. I'm sure I'm slaughtering the Latin. So it's gain. It looks like a bag with a mouth open for things to come into. So you can use a single dice and cast your figure that way, and you'll do that 4 times for the mother. I typically use dice method here, in which I use 4 dice. You can go to often comic book shops or gaming shops. Will have dice that are open, containers of dice, because they use them for like Dungeons and Dragons and gaming dice. And so what I did here, this is probably the one that I use the most, although I use this a lot as well. I have a red dice, which reflects fire. I have a yellow dice, which the color yellow is connected with, or die, I should be saying, right, not dice, which is connected to air. I have blue, kind of a blue, looks like an oceany water for water, and then I have green tones for earth. And so that means I can shake this up, thinking about my question, cast, and then I have my figure all laid out in one casting. So fire is 2, which is receptive, 6, which is, again, a passive number here. We have 1 in water for active, and 2. So here we have Albus, or the figure for peace. And so in one casting, I know this is this is going to associate with fire, air, water, and earth. Another easy way to do that, that's easy to find, you can find these sets in Barnes and Nobles, again, comic book shops, Amazon. They're called polyhedral dice sets, and they're again used for like Dungeons and Dragons and gaming, for cast damage, what's going to cast damage and things of that nature. But what's interesting about a polyhedral dice set, which comes with 7 dice, is that 4 of them have the Platonic element shapes. So this is a Platonic elemental shape for fire. This is the shape for air. This is the shape for water. And this square is a shape for earth. And so just as with this, I can shake these dice up. Again, thinking of my question, drop them and say, okay, well, here is air. It's a 3, so that is an odd number. It's a single dot. Okay, here is 7 on my air. That is an odd number, so it's a single dot. Here is my water, which is 13, which is a single dot. And here is 6 for earth. And so that is a double passive dot. And this gives us cauda draconis, or the idea of endings here. And so that would cast in one shot, because I know which one relates to which line of my figure, and it would allow in one shot to cast a geomancy figure. These are primarily the way that I cast geomancy figures. Now, there's one other way. Let me grab a deck of cards here. You can cast a deck of, use a deck of cards to cast. And you would do that again with this is how I do this, because with geomancy you go from right to left. You don't go from left to right, you go right to left. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You're going from left to right. And so I cast my cards the same way. So again, you would be shuffling your cards, shuffling your cards, shuffling your cards, again thinking about your question, right? And then you would do however you want to split, and you would lay 4 cards out, and you would say, okay, here we have Jack. Okay, well, so this would be for fire because it's the very first position. So we would have the Jack here. So we have ace through 10, and then we have Jack, Queen, King, right? So Jack would be 11. That is an odd number, and so I would leave this upright. 10 being an even number, and for the second one, ace, of course, being 1, being an odd number, and 9. And so here we would have Puella, the figure for harmony. So you can cast using a deck of cards this way. I think that there is some question about how, if you really get down to the mathematics, if you have a completely even chance for all numbers, maybe a little bit less in playing cards doing it that way. But it's a great way to do it, because one of the things that's neat about that way is that you can also then read the cards themselves if you do playing card divination, which we'll talk about in another video. But anyways, those are the ways in which you can, and I'm sure there's many more than that, but those are the primary ways in which you can cast a geomancy figure. But these are the most obvious here, so let's take these and see. Now, what is the purpose, you might say, of doing a geomancy shield? The purpose of doing a geomancy shield is to get down here to the judge. The judge is everything. He is the ruler. He has made his ruling, and this is the answer to the question. Then there are many other things to do outside of it, but at its simplest, we are asking a question and we are getting an answer. Now so this is like the court down here. Everything else that we do up here is only to take us down here to the court. This gives us some information here. The first witness tells us some information about the querent. This tells us some information about the question. It can also be past and future, these types of things, but they are still getting us down to the judge. And then there is a sentence which can tell us the effect it's going to have on the querent, which is always represented in the first house. But again, in a nutshell, which is what this video is about, we're trying to do a process of equations that brings us down to this final answer. And the judge is the final answer. No matter what else you do, no matter what other information you get, the judge is the final answer. And we're trying to get to that. And so in the process of doing that, in terms of divining and randomness and synchronicity, we are only casting 4 figures, which are the mothers. And then everything else is created from the mothers, as you will see. So let's go ahead and cast a reading. And I do like to actually do an actual reading. Let me get another color to use. I don't generally find fake readings are to be very helpful or successful. And so I do actually have somebody who has a question about whether this is a good time to move their job, to change jobs. And so the focus is on, oh, this might be too light. Oh yeah, let me get a darker color here. So the focus here is on a job. That tells us another thing that tells us, and again, this is just snapshot, right? Snapshot. It's not going to tell you everything that you need to do. But in terms of looking at a house, we would look also in the 10th house for career. So I'm going to put 10th house there as the house of the question. And then we're going to go ahead and cast with that question of whether or not this is the time to start looking for another job, and there's actually a job that's sort of in mind. So whether this is a good idea to pursue this other job. So we are going to cast the first 4 mothers here. Okay, so here we have, again, fire, right? Air, water, earth. And I'll flip them here just so that you can see them. But we have fire is 3, so that's inactive. We have air as active. We have water line as passive. And we have earth line as active. So here we have the figure puer. And so I'm just going to write that down here in the chart. And then we're going to cast our next figure. In a nutshell, just to say, okay, how is this, how is she feeling? And again, you can download these charts. There are 2 pages that have each one of the figures. And so we can see puer, it's associated with boy. You can see it has the girl, you think of the girl as having breasts and the boy as having testicles. That helps you to remember that. And it gives you keywords. It gives you the elements. It gives you, so again, that's keyword of the main kind of name for the in English. And then you have some keywords for it. You have its association with the planet, its association with a sign, which house it's strongest or weakest in, and which house it's strongest in, whether or not it's traditionally favorable or unfavorable. That's going to really depend on the question as well. There are all kinds of exceptions to this rule and what its primary element is. And so you can download this if you go down to my handouts. As well as this chart. I believe that this chart is on there as well. So, going back to this person and their question of a job and whether this is the time to move, we can see from puer, this keyword is for energy. It's very passionate. It's very moving energy. It's very masculine, but it can be a little bit random. It can be a little bit unstable. She's ready to do something, right? She's got that energy of doing something, but she may not be making the best decisions surrounding this because she's just ready to kind of, it's that young teenage boy energy that's bouncing off the walls, and it's not necessarily always bad, even though it is traditionally unfavorable, but whether that is the case in terms of this reading, but it does kind of indicate an energetic state that she might be in. So when we cast for the next mother, again, we have fire, we have air, we have water, and we have earth. You can see here we have even numbers all the way down, right? All the way down except for the bottom one. And you can literally see here that this makes an almost downward arrow figure. So you can actually look at the figures themselves and see what they have, a sense of what they are. This is tristtia, which is the keyword for sorrow. This is downward motion. And so we have that for the second mother. But we're not reading these other houses right now. I do tend to look at the mother, and I will look at the figure that is in the work house. But in general, the whole point is to get to this judge, which is the answer. So we're going to cast 2 more times. So here we have 1, here we have 1, here we have 2, and here we have 1. So we have puer again. And then we're going to cast 1 more time. And so here we have our order here. We have an odd number for 1, an odd number for 1, even and odd. A lot of prayer energy, right? We have a lot of energy bouncing about just from our mothers. So, oops, made a mess. There we go. Stick it right. We're done now. We have already cast what we're going to cast, and the rest is a series of combining. So we're going to next go from the mothers to the daughters. The first row of mothers equals the first daughter. 1, 2, 1, 1. 1, 2, 1, 1. So we have Puela. The second row is the second daughter. 1, 2, 1, 1. 1, 2, 1, 1. So we have Puela again. 2, 2, 2, 2 for Populus in the third daughter. And then the final row is Via, which is the way, which is all single dots. So that's how we create the daughter. And now we're going to work our way downward by combining the numbers. So we're taking, you can see these two become 1, these two become 1, these two become 1, these two become 1. These two become 1, these two become 1, these two become 1. We're combining the rest of them. And to do that, we're adding 2 plus 1 is 3. That is an odd number. 2 plus 1 is 3. It's an odd number. 2 plus 2 is 4. It's an even number. 1 plus 1 is 2, which is an even number. So here we have the figure Fortuna Minor. Okay? And then we're going to go down to the judge. 1 plus 1 is 2, which is even. 1 plus 1 is 2, which is even. 2 plus 1 is 3, which is odd, which is a single dot. 2 plus 1 is 3, which is a single dot. And so we have our judgment card, which is Fortuna Major. This is a power number, or power figure. The figure means power. This is a figure that is very favorable. This is about, it's connected with the sun, it's connected with Leo. It is very much that idea. It's a person, if you're looking at a person, it's a very honest and generous person, but this is a success card. So this would say very favorable. Yes, this is the time to move forward on taking this other job. Now, we can also look, get some, there's much other information. That is geomancy at its simplest. We can see underlying issues by looking to this fire line, and sometimes if there's a 2, we follow the 2 upward. There isn't in this one. We can also look to the house of the question, and here we have the figure Populus, which is a stable number. This is also a favorable number, so this would give us, okay, this would be a stable job. This would be a good place to, again, I'm really nutshelling this, right? This would tell us that. And the other thing we can do is combine the querent with the judge and figure out the sentence or the ruling. If this goes into place, how is this going to affect this person in the long run? We have 1 plus 2 is 1. 1 plus 2 is 1. 2 plus 1 is 1. And 1 plus 1 is 2. And so here we have the figure for endings, right? So this is a sense of completion. This is an idea of letting go of the past. She's in a really difficult job right now. This might be the idea this is going to allow her to let go of a past that wasn't working for her. Again, sorry, nutshell, right? Nutshell. So that is a shield house for geomancy. And in a nutshell, this is what the point is to do all of this to gain. Yes, we can get some more information about the querent. Yes, we can get information about the question. But in the end, what is the judgment? And the judgment in this position is, yes, she should go for this other job. So what is geomancy good for? Geomancy is really good for energetically reading the situation. We can literally see, if we look at the question or the querent with the question here, whatever it is, we can see, okay, this has stayed the same in the fire line. this has stayed the same. We've had a big shift here in the water and the earth line here. We can see that she's ready to be active. Her feet were pretty grounded and stuck, and now it is active and she's ready. Her emotions were not really ready to let go of the other job. Now those have shifted, right? So we can look and see what has changed between the two, and that can give us for a past and a future sort of energy. There's a lot of understanding of energy that goes into this that really helps us dig into the flow. We can follow things down to figure out underlying issues, but in the end, they really excel at precise answers. Yes and no answers. There are many other things that go into that, but like Lenormand, it's one of those things where you really ask the question concisely and you get a concise answer. But then you can go so far into this astrological part where you can do a year ahead reading, and you can look at each of the houses and see the figures that are there, because these are the, up until we get to the Judge, these are the 12 houses of astrology, and so we can go to each one of those houses and see energetically what's going in that house in the coming month or the coming week or right now or in the year that's coming ahead. This is how this would have been used for many different things. You can do them at the birth of a child, again, as sort of a information about those various aspects of the child's life. So it's very much tied and sisterhooded in with astrology. So there's so much there, but in a nutshell, it's amazing for yes and no questions. The only forms of divination I use for yes and no questions are geomancy or playing cards, and so it's just a beautiful system. If working with the elements, the 4 elements, really something that interests you, this to me really taps into that strong understanding of elemental energy and how it's moving. If that understanding of yin and yang and passive and active energy is something that interests you like me, this might be something that interests you as well. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I'm guessing this is probably a little bit longer. I'll try to squeeze. I'm trying to keep them around a half an hour. But again, visit my geomancy playlist, and or if this interests you, I would definitely recommend The Art and Practice of Geomancy by John Michael Greer. No, I am not paid to advertise this. I just really like this book. So I hope that you all have a wonderful day, and I hope that you enjoyed this divination snapshot.